My name is Dorian Brown, Dorian Anthony Brown, if you ask my mother. Um, I teach at St. Louis Community College, Forest Park. I've been teaching there over altogether about 19 years now. Um, my my bachelor's is from the University of Illinois in Urbana in history, just regular history. I specialized in, we had what they call an area of concentration, area specialization. So my specialization was ancient history and my concentration was African history. I went to grad school at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, got my master's in history, really African American history. My interest in many ways is the continuum from Africa to America. And then I got my master's in '99, and then I just went back to get my doctorate from SLU, from St. Louis University, beginning in the fall of 2014. I always wanted to know why. That was always my question. Well, if this is going on, well, why is this happening? What caused this to happen? And really that ends up being history. Anything, I try to tell my students that whenever they say they don't like history, I say, no, you like history. You just may not like this particular history that you're studying. But if you have something that you're interested in, you're interested in history, because if I were to ask you about that thing, you could tell me it's history. So we all have that kind of interest. Okay. I think that for me, I'll put it that way. If I were defining racism, I'd define it as a power relationship. Which is where this institutionalization comes from. So racism is based in the institutions that we have, where the bigotry and the prejudice becomes institutionalized. And that's where the racism comes in, because now there's this power relationship that exists between the races. So it benefits one race to the detriment of another within the institutions of a country. That, to me, is racism. Well, we haven't learned to understand one another in this country. Maybe in the world. Yeah. But particularly in this country, we haven't learned to understand one another. Everybody wants to be heard, but nobody wants to listen. And that becomes a big problem. This whole, thing with the flag and all the flags and the Confederate monuments. I personally always think that there's a way to work things out, but there was a lot of not listening on either side of the issue, and you could have come to, because as a historian, I'm torn, okay, because while I totally understand, because I'm an African American, right? So while I completely understand how these monuments are offensive, I also, as a historian, want to preserve the history. I don't want to forget about it. So I don't want you to remove this statue and now all of a sudden we forget why it was here in the first place. I want people to know that history. I want people to know who this person is and what this person represented. That's important. Don't hide that. So while at the same time, I want to preserve that history, because as a historian, I feel it's important and I feel we can all learn from that. At the same time, I understand why those statues were put there. I mean, come on. Missouri did not leave the Union. So why is there a Confederate monument in Missouri? Why is there that kind of thing? So because what happens is now that monument becomes a symbol. It becomes a symbol to Black people that, okay, well, while you're on the one hand saying, well, this is my heritage, but to Black people, it's saying that, okay, you didn't leave the Union, but yet you are giving honor to one, people who separated from the Union, and secondly, people who wanted to keep us in bondage. So how do we reconcile that? Because that's what that's a symbol of to me. So again, like I said, I get it. I just don't want to lose the history. I think there's, some happy medium. I mean, spend some more money and tack some more plaques to it and tell the whole story, or that kind of thing. But again, I think that's a debate, or discuss. I shouldn't say a debate. That's a discussion that needs to be had, and people need to sit and have that talk, and all sides can come to an agreement. Yeah. A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. That's a step toward getting rid of racism. But let's not act like the entire country voted for President Obama. Let's not pretend that people weren't hanging them in effigy in places. And people have hung Donald Trump in effigy too. Let me be clear about that. But it doesn't change the emails that you receive from these people in these higher up organizations, referring to him and Michelle as monkeys and these kinds of things. So let's not act as if just because we had a black president that those kinds of ideas, which are the foundation of racism, because again, those are bigoted ideas. That those bigoted ideas that form the foundation of racism don't still exist, and which allow racism to continue to perpetuate itself. Well, let's get into why are black people always playing the victim? What is happening? What is going on where black people have spoken out against something, and then you had to tell them they were playing the victim? Let's deal with that situation, because it goes back to the Kaepernick thing. Everybody looked at the idea of the flag and disrespecting the flag, and nobody went to what he was really talking about. This is the same thing. Okay, you say I'm playing the victim. Why do you think that I'm playing? Why do you think that I'm playing the victim? What about what I'm saying to you is not true, that I'm playing the victim? What exactly does that mean? Because are we going to act like black people haven't been victims? Can we really say that? And I think that, again, that those are people who, also going back to your previous question, think that racism has ended because black people have all these opportunities. Because see, what they see is the LeBron Jameses of the world, it's high place. They see the Lil Waynes, the Kendrick Lamars of the world, and they see black people having those opportunities. So what are you complaining about, right? It's over. Y'all are making this. Well, that's not the point. So I remember hearing a sportscaster get on LeBron James saying that the incident that happened to his house when somebody spray painted nigger on his gate in Los Angeles, that it was a minor inconvenience. Now, this was a black sportscaster who said this. Oh, it was just a minor inconvenience. He hasn't experienced any racism. He had his staff clean it up. And I was like, he wasn't even there. I was like, but that's not the point. The point is that after everything that he's done, after all the accolades, after all the money, after all the community service, that somebody still only sees him as a nigger. That's a very powerful thing. So again, some people could say he's playing the victim. He got millions of dollars. That doesn't matter. Yes, it does. It matters a lot to know that that's how people view you. That's all that they see. And you know, that's the one thing that gets into, you know, this things about police brutality and so on and so forth, where people say that black people are playing the victim. It's real easy to say that if you haven't been a victim of it, you know, as I have been on a number of occasions. Black people aren't too sensitive. Some people just are less sensitive. No. Marketing is it's directed at a particular audience. They're very particular about certain things. I mean, if they're as particular about how this flower is sitting on this table, right? If you're that, you know, focused in on how this lighting reflects off of this shirt or blah, 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 then you mean to tell me you weren't thinking about how putting this young black child in a shirt that said the coolest monkey in the jungle, was it insensitive? Yeah. So I think that they definitely bear all the responsibility. Now, whether, you know, if there's anything punitive that comes from it, you know, about, you know, maybe people stop shopping there, or, you know, clothing lines pulling out, well, then that's on those, you know, individual clothing lines or whatever. And one would hope that this doesn't happen again, but it continues to happen. This isn't the first, and the problem is when we become insensitive to it. That becomes the problem. I think the big problem becomes when we say, oh, okay, well, there it goes again. When we stop being sensitive to it, I think that's a bigger issue. The truth. And this is why I say that. This is what I mean by the truth. We have to really understand all of the complexities of history. History is very intersectional. Okay, I believe it's Patricia Hill Collins who talks about this idea, but she's talking about women, but all but still history talking about this idea of intersectionality, how class and age and race and gender and all these things come in, and religion, all these things intersect. And so I think that one of the things that's left out is, when I say the truth, and I mean all the complexities of it. And being that this is Martin Luther King Day, let me explain what I mean. So we all know, and we're all taught in school about Martin Luther King. Well, let's also talk about the fact that, okay, Martin Luther King becomes basically famous as a result of the Montgomery bus boycott. But the Women's Political Council of Montgomery had sent a letter to I believe it was the mayor and to the drivers union or something, a year and a half before that, saying, hey, black women are the majority of the bus riders, and we don't like the way that we're being treated. And if we continue to be treated this way, we're going to stop riding the buses. The night that they announced the boycott, Joanne Robinson, who was the president of the Women's Political Council, went and printed 35,000 copies. This is 1955, by herself, and distributed these things. So what I mean by the complexities is that let's remember Dr. King, yes, but let's also remember Joanne Robinson. Let's remember Septima Clark. Let's remember Bayard Rustin. Let's remember Ella Baker. Let's remember Walter White. Let's remember, Malcolm X. I think he's become a very polarizing figure. But when you really read Malcolm and what Malcolm was saying, you get a different picture. And we also have to be willing to stop believing the myths and be willing to do some reading on our own, because if it's something that's missing, it's there. We just have to go look and find it. And I think sometimes we aren't willing to go look and find that information. And so then we rely on myth and Facebook to tell us stuff. Like, I remember saying something where it made a comment about Black Friday being the day that they sold slaves or something. I was like, what? Or the idea that they talk about Willie Lynch, the Willie Lynch letter. And so we oftentimes romanticize things, and we have to not romanticize as much as well. And I think that that is part of that whole idea of knowing the truth. So again, we're talking about ideas of symbols, okay? And things that are symbolic, and what is symbolic to one person may not carry the same weight or mean the same thing to another person. So in many ways, the way a lot of African Americans see the American flag is they see it as a symbol of oppression. Okay. Even though, Black people had tried for years to show their patriotism. There were in all of the wars that you talk about, was the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, Spanish American War, the Civil War, World War I, you name them. Black people volunteered to fight, okay? Because the idea was, okay, if I show my patriotism, that I'm willing to fight and die for this country, just as my white brothers are, then they'll give me equality, okay? And what they realized for a long time is that it didn't work. They were put in segregated units within the Army. For a long time. There's a good documentary called Men of Bronze that deals with this. They talk to some of the Black soldiers that fought during World War I. And they talk about how they would go down south to train. Because if you think about it, that's where most of our military bases are, where they train people. Fort Bragg and all those in the south, because it's warm, right? So how they would go down south, and they would have to fight off the racists who didn't want to see Black men in uniform. Or after World War II, after we fought and came back, well, over in Europe, I was treated, they had parades for me. I come back to the United States, and yeah, they having a parade, but as soon as I'm getting off the boat, it's a soldier standing there saying, coloreds this way, white soldiers that way. When we just got finished fighting and dying together, and now I come back to this, with soldiers being hung, lynched, in their military uniforms. Soldiers riding the bus in their military uniforms, attacked by white racists. To them, it means something different. And and there's nothing wrong with that either. So when you think about racism, essentially, how a lot of acts of violence that were perpetrated by under the guise of patriotism, right? Under the guise of the United States of America. Then some people may not see the flag the way that other people do. Some people see the flag as a symbol of freedom, as a symbol of democracy, and I'm just using buzzwords here, as a symbol of equality. And in many ways, it is all of those things. But in many ways, it's also those other things that I was talking about before. So it means something different. The Confederate flag is the same way. To the Confederates, or people who have this flag, they say this represents our history. Okay, well, okay, that's fine. But understand that to me, this represents a group of states who left the Union so that they could keep me and my ancestors, they could keep my ancestors in bondage. So understand the things that were done to me under the symbol of this flag, right? So that's the conversation many people don't want to have. People were trying to get Lincoln to make this a war for emancipation and to free the slaves. He wouldn't do it. So Horace Greeley, who was I think he may have been the owner, but he was definitely the editor or something for this particular magazine, criticizes Lincoln for not freeing the slaves. And Lincoln responds to him. And Lincoln says, in short, he gives this much longer speech, but he says, my paramount objective in this struggle is not to either save nor destroy slavery. He says, if I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do that. And he says, if I could free it by, freeing some and leaving others, I would do that. He says, what I do, to save this Union. He says, and what I forbear, meaning what I don't do, I do to save this Union. So even once the war had started, his idea wasn't to free the slaves. Okay. So he then, on September the 22nd, he writes the Emancipation Proclamation. He says, whereas on the 2nd day of September in the year of our Lord, 1862, a proclamation was issued by the President of the United States containing, among other things, the following, to wit, that on the 1st day of January in the year of our Lord, 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state, the people whereof shall there be in rebellion against the United States shall be then, thenceforth, and forever free. Okay, that's a direct quote. I quote it so much, it just comes naturally. Because I'm always quoting it, right? So it really does come naturally after a while. So you have to see those dates. He says on September 22nd, 1862 is when I'm issuing this. On January the 1st, 1863 is when all the slaves will be free. But he doesn't say all slaves will be free. He says all slaves in states or designated parts of states that shall be in rebellion against the United States. So what he's doing is he's giving the Confederacy the opportunity to come back to the Union. He says, if you come back to the Union, you get to keep your slaves. I'm only freeing the slaves that are in states and designated parts of the states which are in rebellion. So he gives them 100 days. And he says, he uses the phrase 100 days and from 100 days from the above mentioned order. Okay. And then he tells you which states and which parts of states are at that point in rebellion. And then he makes exceptions. He says, Louisiana, he says Arkansas, Mississippi, Texas. He lists all these states, right? Then he says Virginia, except the 48 counties designated as West Virginia and Berkeley, Accomack, and all these places. Then he says in Louisiana, except the parishes of Pauncabine, St. John, St. James, Jefferson, Assumption, Terrebonne. He lists all these places. And he says, then he names some other states. He says, and which accepted parts are, for the present, left as if this proclamation were not issued. So he names these places. Then he says there are certain places within these states where y'all can act like I never even wrote this. So Louisiana, parts of Virginia, because West Virginia wasn't a state yet. It doesn't become a state until 1863 because of the Civil War. So places in West Virginia, places in Louisiana could keep their slaves. He never mentions Tennessee in the Emancipation Proclamation, nor does he mention Missouri, Kentucky, Maryland, or Delaware. But see, this is the thing. Okay, when people talk about emancipation freeing all the slaves, well, one, it doesn't free all of the slaves. You can read the document and see that it doesn't free all of the slaves, one. Secondly, the thing about secession was that the Confederates had formed their own country. They had a president, Jefferson Davis. They had a vice president. They had a capital at Richmond. They had written their own constitution. So how do you free slaves in someone else's country? with the stroke of a pen. It's just something to think about. Again, historical context. And then also, two more things. The Confederacy, again, as I tell people, the Emancipation Proclamation was not law. It was a proclamation. He's proclaiming this. It's not a law. So what do you think I always ask my students, so what do you think the Confederacy thought about this? And the reason I say that is because the Civil War doesn't end until 1865. So they fought for 2 more years. So when do you think that they gave up them slaves? It sure wasn't in 1863. And they sure didn't tell them that they were free, and they couldn't read it for themselves. And then, last but not least, again, the Emancipation Proclamation is not law. So what frees the slaves is the 13th Amendment. It's an old boys network. Funny thing again, when you ask people, so it's really easy to get on the first black president, right? I would ask those same people, how many black senators have there been? And they go, how many black representatives have there been? Or how many Latino or Asian senators or whatever have there been? And
the answers are?
Well, there have been 6, I think it may be 7 or 8 now. But Barack Obama made number 6 black senator in the history of this country. So if you think about the number of we could talk about, it's easy to say 1 out of 44. But when you talk about the number of senators, it's 100 of them that have come through, and it's only been prior to Barack Obama, it had only been 6 of them that was black, and even less that were Latina. So that's where we start dealing with this. Again, power. The president only keeps his job 4, maybe 8 years. That's it. We got politicians that's been there 20. They've outlasted how many presidents? The president becomes the figurehead. I mean, even Trump becomes the figurehead. So he becomes the person that it's easy to throw barbs at. I mean, don't get me wrong. Trump makes it easy, to do that. But he becomes the person that's easy to throw barbs at. But what about these other characters that are here? Because the president doesn't pass law. He can't. He can campaign and try to get people to pass a law. But the people that pass the laws are the congressmen. All that he does is okay it. He cannot, by Constitution, make law. There's a reason why the president can't make law. There's a reason why, the Congress can't execute it or interpret. There's a reason why we have those branches. So we forget all politics is local. Instead of worrying about it, not that we shouldn't. I don't want to say don't vote for the presidency or whatever. But my point is that we need to pay just as much attention to who the president is as who the senators are, who the representatives are, but even more importantly, who our mayor, who are state representatives, because those are the people that really have an impact on us every day. What the president does, tax reform is not necessarily going to, if you really study it, it's not going to really have a big impact. But those are the things that we're looking at. The things we need to pay attention to are the stuff that happens locally. When these little funding bills come up to fund schools and such, and then you see, if you ever pay attention to it, right, you'll notice that they'll be showing the president the presidential race, the election, and there'll be 2,300,000 votes or whatever, for Clinton, and 3 million so and so votes for Trump. And then you look down at the ticker at the bottom and it says Proposition A, 4,000 voted. Those are the things that matter. Those little things are the ones that really matter because they have an effect long term. I mean, I have so many of them, man. I mean, I think maybe the one that got me the most was driving to, I was in Tennessee, So I'm professor, I'm associate professor at St. Louis Community College. I got my master's degree. This is about maybe 2010, right? So I got my master's degree. I've been working at my job, for eight years, continuing faculty. Had gotten a BMW. My father had just passed, but I had a BMW before that. And then when my father passed, he left me and my brothers a little bit of money, and I put a down payment on another BMW, a newer one. So I had a BMW. So I'm feeling good about myself. I did everything I was supposed to do. Been to school, all this kind of stuff. So I'm driving in Tennessee, and I get pulled over. So he pulls me over. He said I was speeding. I said, okay. So he asked me for, license and registration. So he goes back to the car, and he says, "Nice car, Mr. Brown." I said, "Thank you. I have a job," right? I know where this is going. So he goes back. He sits in his car for a few minutes. He comes back, and he says, "It's taken a second for me to get some of the information to come back." He says, "Do you mind if I search your car while we wait?" I said, "Yeah, I mind if you search my car while we wait. What probable cause do you have to want to search my car? If I'm speeding, I'm speeding, but you just can't search my car, just because while you're waiting." So then he tells me, step out of the car. Would you step out of the car? Step out of the car for what? What am I stepping out of the car for? "Step out the car, please." So I get out the car, step out the car. So he makes me stand to the side. And while he has me standing to the side, 2 other cars pull up. So they bring the police dog, right? So he has me stay. He doesn't handcuff me or anything. He has me standing there with my hands behind my back, fingers interlocked. And so they take the dog around my car, and the dog goes, "Yep, yep," right? So then all of a sudden, like they start, talking on their walkie-talkie. He's doing whatever it is, I guess, trying to look intimidating or whatever. So then he makes me sit in the back of the car. So then they search my car. So they search my car, and he comes back to me, and they don't find anything. Of course, right? Problem number 1. So what does that tell me about how your dog is trained? See, either you lying or your dog is trained badly, because you didn't find anything. So that becomes my question. Okay, but anyway, prior to that, so he comes back to me and he says, "Mr. Brown, you want to check your car and make sure nothing was taken?" I said, "No, I don't need to do that." He says, no, go ahead and, check the car, make sure, nothing was taken. I looked at him, I said, "Brother, nothing's been taken today with my dignity." And I got in the car. Started my car. Now, he never did give me a ticket, because he said I was speeding. He never did give me a ticket. They have very valid points. They do. Of course. You do that? Yeah. There are exceptions to every rule. Philando Castile did that. License to carry. I got this, and this. Hey, I got blah, 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 blah. That's what they tell you to do. Boom, they shot him anyway. Okay. So, yes, they have a point. But what I think that people need to be educated on, and this is anybody, know your rights. Know what they are. Like, literally know what your rights are. And you should be able to let the police officer know that you know your rights. But again, it depends on the situation. I've been, I'm not saying that every time I've been pulled over by the police, it was some racist incident. I'm a speeder. So, I've been pulled over legitimately by the police. But I'm going to let you know that I understand what it is that you're doing, but that I also know my rights. But I think also what happens too is that we also have to know our limitations. Once you begin to see, I mean, if you're someone who's confrontational, you're not going to tell a confrontational person not to be confrontational. Because at a certain point you should be. You shouldn't just take this kind of stuff just, lying down, so to speak, right? And I believe that everybody should speak up for themselves. But we also have to be very aware of our environment, very aware of our surroundings, and very aware of the situation that we find themselves in. Every situation may not be, some situations may be the situation where you just need to shut up. Do what he says. But the problem is the power. That becomes the issue. They always talk about speaking truth to power, and we should speak truth to power. But sometimes the power that they have, they misuse that power. And there has to be someone to check that. There has to be some kind of checks and balances to check that.